This is lesson 3.4 on multiplying decimal numbers, part 1. Before watching the recording, please make sure that you have a pencil, some different colored pens, and maybe a highlighter. As well, you should be on a graph sheet of paper. You can either be on a graph sheet of paper in your binder, or please be on a graph sheet of paper in your journals. Take a few moments now to grab any of those items and then also start copying out what you see on this page. So at this point, you might want to pause the recording to catch up. So again, you need today's date, the title, and then make sure you jot down the 3 estimation strategies that were mentioned last lesson. So I'm going to continue. This lesson 3.4 continues on from the previous lesson where we estimated products and quotients. And we didn't actually do the calculations, and this lesson we will, but we're going to focus on why we still estimate before we actually calculate the products when multiplying decimal numbers. So if you remember from last time, we went over 3 estimation strategies. So I'm just going to highlight the 3 here. So the first one we talked about was decimal benchmarks. So if you recall, that's the more traditional way of estimating because you're following the rules of rounding. The second estimation strategy we went over was front-end estimation. And front-end, in this case, refers to the front numbers that you'll just take before the decimal. So sometimes it'll follow the rules of rounding, but oftentimes it doesn't because all you're doing is simply taking the front numbers before the decimal and you're calculating it. Lastly, the other estimation strategy we talked about was something called compatible numbers. And I like to call these friendly numbers. So nice numbers that you can calculate in your head. Again, it doesn't necessarily follow the rules of rounding. It doesn't necessarily follow the rules of front-end estimation. Your compatible numbers can be a few numbers off so long as you're able to do the math in your head. So keep these estimation strategies in mind and we'll refer to them as we go through this lesson. What I'd also like you to make note of are some tips for multiplying. So when you're multiplying decimal numbers, and these will make more sense when we go through some questions. Okay, so number 1, you need to forget the decimal. Oftentimes, students are taught to multiply decimal numbers and then the decimal placement and the actual answer or the product is dependent on counting. And the problem is that when you count, you're not really thinking if your answer makes sense or not. Estimating to place the decimal is one of the better strategies because you're analyzing if your answer really makes sense. You're analyzing if your answer makes sense within the context of the question. So you're going to forget the decimal when you're multiplying decimal numbers. And then you're going to multiply the whole numbers. You're going to multiply as usual. And you're going to use whatever strategy you're comfortable with when multiplying decimal numbers. In this video, I'm going to show you 2. And please feel free to choose whatever strategy you want that makes you more comfortable and that you're familiar with. I only ask that you show all of your work. Finally, number 3, thing to remember with multiplying decimal numbers, you're going to estimate to place the decimal back in your answer. So please remember these steps when you're multiplying decimal numbers. Also, when you're approaching questions and you're using graph paper, I would also suggest that you make sure you have 1 digit per graph square. So in the example, we're going to go over to apply these strategies and to apply these tips. What I'd like you to do is make sure, like in my example, 2 and 778 thousandths times 9. Notice that I'm putting 1 digit per square. Now, if you look back at our tips, we're going to forget the decimal. So I'm going to rewrite this over here. And I'm also going to rewrite it so it's vertical because it's easier to multiply. 2,700, oh, sorry, I just rewrote it with the decimal. So I'm going to say 2,778 times 9. So one way to multiply is if you multiply everything times 9. So that's just kind of what you would say the more traditional way. So I'm going to go 8 times 9, which is 72. I'm going to write down the 2 and I'm going to carry the 7. I'm going to just color code this so you're clear as to my process. I'm going to multiply 7 times 9 now, okay? And make sure that you're lining up your answer and that you're taking one digit per square. 7 times 9 is 63. I'm going to add the 7 up there and I'm going to get 70. I'm going to put down the 0 and I'm going to carry the 7 so it's right on top of that one. I'm going to switch colors again and go green. I'm going to multiply 7 times 9 again. Okay, so I'm taking care of that. Sorry, it's a little bit messy, but hopefully you can follow the process. 7 times 9, I know is 63. I'm going to add 7 to that, and it's another 70. I'm going to place the 0 down there, and I'm making sure I'm lining it up, and I'm going to place a 7 up here. I am going to switch colors again. I'm going to go to purple here. Then I'm going to do 2 times 9. 2 times 9 is the last multiplication here, and that's 18. 18 plus 7 will give me 25. Now I've finished multiplying, okay? Now, again, the more traditional way of multiplication where you're just taking the diagonals and that you're carrying your digits over. Now, we've forgotten the decimal, right? So we've done that. We've multiplied it as whole numbers. We've done that. Now, the third step is to estimate to place the decimal in your answer. Now, if you look at our original question, we've got 2 and 778 thousandths times 9. Well, okay, I'm going to access one of these strategies up here. So I'm going to go with decimal benchmarks. So my estimate using decimal benchmarks, if I were to use decimal benchmarks, I want you to think about what your estimate would be. So pause it and jot down what the estimate of that product would be using decimal benchmarks. So I'm going to continue. I know that 2 and 778 thousandths is going to round up to 3, so I'm going to go 3 times 9, which is 27. Now, if I know my answer has to be around 27, think about where the decimal place will go in this in this product. If it has to be around 27, therefore, the decimal has to be there. Again, estimating helps us determine where the decimal placement goes. It gives us a benchmark as to where our answer should be, and it gets you thinking and analyzing your answer. Now, I'm going to go over another strategy of multiplication. So again, if you're not familiar with the strategy and you choose not to use it, that's perfectly fine. I'm just going to erase this line. And this is called repeated addition, what I'm about to do. So again, I'm going to still follow the same process. I'm going to forget the decimal. So I'm going to rewrite it as whole numbers. So 2,778 times 9. And some of you may be familiar with this strategy from last year. Now, repeated addition, it looks like it's more steps. However, there's less carrying and I guess less confusion in terms of what you've multiplied already. Okay, but I am still going to do it step by step here. So here, I'm just going to use the same colors here. Follow the same process. I know that 8 times 9 is going to be 72. And notice how I'm writing it. I'm lining it up really carefully. Then I'm going to go to the next line. Okay, let's do orange to keep it consistent. The next line, I'm going to go 7 times 9 again. Okay. I'm going to go with 7 times 9 is 63, but I'm going to add another 0 here to account for the fact that you're moving it over into the hundredths spot. Okay, so I've got 630 on the next line. That's 7 times 9. And then you're going to go again and do another 7 times 9. But because you're moving it, you need to be consistent and move it another place over. So that becomes 6,300. Okay. Now, finally, again, with this method, there's less carrying, and some believe there's less calculations happen. So you be the judge for this. The last line will be 2 times 9. Well, 2 times 9 is 18. But again, you have to account for the fact that you're moving it over a few places, so it has to be 18,000 there. Now, you follow the similar process now where you're adding everything up. And again, some people believe this is less room. You tend to make less errors using this method. So you're just adding each column. 1 plus 6 is 7 plus 3 is 10. And then 8 plus 6 is 14 plus 1 is 15. And you can see you're arriving at the same answer. Again, you're going back to your decimal benchmark and your estimation. And the decimal place has to be here because your answer has to be around 27. So that's the process. So I'll leave it up to you to choose which method of multiplication you are most comfortable with. I'm going to do one more example, and this time I'm going to use a different estimation strategy. Okay, that was example number 1. Let's do example number 2 over here. Okay, let's do, original question, 11 and 64 hundredths times 5. Okay, so we're going back to our process up here. I'm just going to erase these check marks so we can start fresh. Okay, so again, we're going to forget the decimal. So I'm going to rewrite it to the side, okay, using the same method, first method I had up there. So I'm going to write down 1,164 times 5. Okay. So if you want to pause the recording, do the multiplication yourself, and then come back and replay the recording at this point. I encourage you to do that just so that you get the multiplication practice. So again, choose any strategy of multiplication. I am going to do both, but again, pause it at this point if you want to do it on your own first, and then check your answer when you're done. So I'm going to continue. I'm going to follow the same process of color coding. Now, you don't have to do this every time. I just want to demonstrate the process and the order in which you do it. So you're first going to look at 4 times 5, which is 20. So write down the 0, carry the 2. I'm going to change to orange for the next one. I'm going to go 6 times 5, which is 30, plus 2, which is 32. Write down the 2 for the 1s and carry the 3. I'm done with that too, so I cross that out. The next one is green. And then I'm going to do 1 multiplied by 5 here, which I know is 5, plus 3 is 8. And then the final step, which is purple, I'm going to do 1 times 5 here, which is 5. Okay, now we've multiplied the whole numbers. The third step is estimating to place the decimal in your answer. Okay, last time we used decimal benchmarks. This time let's do, let's do compatible numbers. Compatible numbers, I'm going to rely on my 12 times tables or 5 times tables for this. So this, you could argue this is also decimal benchmarks too, because you would round it up to 12, but I'm going to look at it as compatible numbers. So I know my estimate is going to be 12 times 5. If I look at the original question, I'm looking at it as 12 times 5. I know my answer, therefore, has to be around 60. So think to yourself, if your answer is around, your estimate is around 60, where does the decimal place have to go? Well, your answer has to be around 58, right? To be consistent with your estimate of 60. Okay, with repeated addition, same process. I'm going to color code. You don't have to do the same thing. I'm just showing the process. So I'm going to first do 4 times 5, which is 20. And then I'm going to do the next line. So again, I'm being careful of lining things up. 6 times 5, I know is 30, but I have to account for the fact it's 1 place over. So it's 300 that I'm going to write. And then the next line is going to be 1 multiplied by 5, which I know is 5, but again, it's another decimal place over. In this case, is going to be 500. And then finally, the last place here is going to be 1 times 5, and that will be 5,000. And then when you add it all up, you get a 0, 2, 8, and 5. Because of that, I know that the estimate here, it has to be at 58 and 20 hundredths because our compatible numbers estimate was at 60. So just to review a few steps here. We went back and we looked at the 3 estimation strategies we covered back in 3.3. So you need to be accessing one of these strategies or several or all 3 of these strategies if you want when you're multiplying decimal numbers. The process when multiplying decimal numbers is that you're forgetting the decimal. So you're multiplying it as usual, like as if they were whole numbers. And then you're going to access one of the estimation strategies to help you place the decimal in your answer. I really want you to think about why we use estimation to place the decimal. Remember, it's because it gets you to think if your answer really makes sense. Again, if we relied on just counting and then placing the decimal point where it should be, you're not really thinking if your calculation is correct or if your answer truly makes sense with the numbers you're multiplying. And that is it.